Hello everyone and welcome. Today's demonstration is this beautiful misty sunset scene with a hot air balloon flying high over these beautiful temples. I'm beginning today with a general pre-drawn outline just showing a little foliage, the silhouettes of the buildings and the hot air balloon, which I've covered in masking fluid. This is the original reference photograph that I'm using today. I'll pop a link to it down in the description below the video. And these are my colours on screen. Very simple today, just some indigo, some burnt sienna and a little bit of twin gold just to liven things up a little bit. And you can see I've begun by masking out the hot air balloon. I've used Pebeo masking fluid to do this. And now I'm just sweeping some water over the entire piece of paper using my large 2-inch flat wash brush. Get that paper nice and wet because we're going to do a lovely little bit of wet and wet for our sunset. Beginning now with the burnt sienna, I'm using Winsor & Newton Cotman brand burnt sienna, which has this lovely glow to it, and I'm just sweeping it in these big horizontal strokes across the top half of the paper. Now introducing a little bit of the quinacridone gold just along the centre here. This isn't going to stay this bright. I'm going to disperse this with a little bit more water and a little bit more burnt sienna, but I think it just gives this lovely extra glow to the central part of this skyline. And now layering on our third colour, this is a little bit of indigo, and you can see it goes on really richly and really nicely and quickly with this lovely big old flat wash brush. Getting our indigo layer nice and quick, getting it nice, again these nice horizontal strokes to bring it up to our sunset colours, and with the wet and wet that's going to diffuse nicely across that central line there. You can see I'm just adding a little bit more water just to encourage this diffusion of colour to give us a nice soft blended edge there. Now whilst our sky is drying and the paint is diffusing beautifully still, we're getting that lovely wet on wet blended edge, I'm putting in some dark rich paint down the bottom of the painting. Beginning with indigo, and you can see I'm just putting it on in quite a haphazard manner and introducing a little bit of the burnt sienna as well. This is quite rich, quite thick paint I'm using here, and I'm damming it on with these nice quick sort of splodgy strokes because I want it to look a little bit wild, a little bit wayward. This is going to be our foreground sort of foliage. This is the first impressions of it anyway. So this rich paint is also going to disperse a little into the wet and wet background, but because it's so much thicker than the layer we've just done, most of it's going to just sit here at the bottom of the paper, and it's going to dry into this really interesting sort of different texture, which is going to be a lovely bit of foreground loose foliage. Now as our sky is drying, the paper is still a bit wet, but it's only damp up the top here, So you can see I'm putting in these clouds, and we're still getting a nice soft diffused edge to these clouds here, but the paint isn't running wildly and spreading too far like it would if I put it on when the paper was very, very wet. So you need damp paper for these sorts of clouds. You can see I'm just using my mop brush here. This is an Astoda Ultimo synthetic mop brush, and just dabbing on the paint lightly, just sweeping it along the sky here. This is a blend of the indigo and the burnt sienna paints I'm using for the clouds. No, no black, no grey, just a good old mix-up of colour. And there was no real plan when I started this as to where I'm putting the clouds. Usually I just do the sky wash first, get those colours in, then have a look and see where it looks like they need to go. Just holding the brush by the end and drifting it horizontally across the paper, getting these lovely little wisps of passing cloud drifting across our sky. So now I'm just going back in here and adding a little bit more extra rich paint down the bottom to just keep pushing those darker colours, get some interesting shapes and interesting marks in the foreground. Again, using the indigo and burnt sienna, got a little bit more of the quinacridone gold mixed in on the left hand side there. You might notice it started to go a little bit green. That's the Quin Gold mixing in with the blue and just giving us this extra little subtle pop of colour. Just decided to pull the foliage a little bit higher up this left side, and you can see as the paper has dried out even more, I'm able to layer up this paint over the ones that the marks that I've already made, and it's staying even more strongly. The paper is only very lightly damp at the moment, so my paint is staying quite still. It's not really diffusing, it's just sort of sitting over the marks I've already made. And just using my foliage brush here to introduce a little bit of additional texture in this foreground. This is an entirely optional step. I was just in the mood to experiment a little bit to see what this would do. So I'm just dabbing it gently over some of these marks we've already made, just softening some edges, giving a little extra detail here and there. Not doing too much, not going too mad right now. So here we are, the painting is now dry, all of it. I must admit I took the hairdryer to the bottom part to encourage it to dry a little faster. So now I can rub off the masking fluid off this balloon here. See, I'm just using my fingertip and it's coming away nice and cleanly. Just get rid of all that and brush all the little bits of latex off our lovely painting, and we're ready for the next step. So now I'm introducing a little bit of colour into the outline of these distant buildings that we've still got. You can still see the vague pencil outline that I drew earlier. This is perfect for what we need. I'm just going to fill these in here with a very loose, very light bit of indigo, using my flat brush to make it easier on myself to get these nice straight lines on the buildings. And just pulling the paint down and watering it down even more towards the bottom of this tower, so it can, the tower, I want it to sort of blend into our lovely misty background wash that we've just put in. It was at this point that I realised my painting was going to turn out a little bit different from the reference photo, which has a couple of different layers of forest and building and a mountain behind it, which I did draw in pencil in my defence. But once I'd put this lovely wash down and put in this foliage, I thought it looked so pretty that I was just going to continue with these misty buildings as it was, rising beautifully out of this foliage, and just see where it went and see where my inspiration took me. And that's the lovely thing about painting from photos such as these. They're beautiful, they're stunning, and they're inspirational. And you don't have to sit there and follow them sort of step by step and try to create a carbon copy of what you see. It's enough sometimes just to be inspired to begin creating. So that's our first building done, our lovely temple tower there. As you can see, I've used really light paint, and I've just introduced a little bit of extra darker paint down the right hand side of it, just to give the illusion of a little bit of light and shadow, a little bit of shape. So I'm going to use exactly the same technique to fill in the rest of the buildings. I must admit, after seeing this photograph, I had to do a little bit of research as to whereabouts in the world this beautiful photo was taken. And I found out that it is the city of Pagan. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, which is an ancient city and a World Heritage Site in Myanmar. It looks astonishingly beautiful from the other photographs I've seen, and it's very quickly gone from somewhere I'd never heard of to somewhere I would very much like to visit at some point in the future. So there we are, a little bit of background for everyone. I must admit, this didn't turn out exactly looking like the incredibly beautiful and detailed temples in Pagan in my painting, but the inspiration and the spirit, I hope, is there. But this is certainly such a lovely photo that I may very well return to it in a few weeks' time and try laying down a different wash and try and get a little bit more depth, trying to get those mountains in there and a few more building shapes perhaps. So again, just using the same technique as before for this lovely last building, filling in the main part of it with the flat brush, which gives us this lovely straight line. And then I'm going to go over and fill in, do some extra little bit of detail work with my very, very fine brush, which is a Pro Art Master Stroke Series 60 miniature brush. I'll pop a full list of my equipment, paints and all that sort of malarkey in the video description. I'm just using a piece of scrunched up tissue here to just pull a little bit of softness out of the shallows that I've just put in using the darker paint. It's a nice way to get a softer edge on the line there, just to use a little bit of scrunched up tissue and just soften that down there. And now I'm just going to use the foliage brush again to help blend our buildings a little more softly into the landscape, so they're not just sort of poking up. Just adding a little bit of extra detail slowly but surely, starting with some quite thin paint and just building up colour and just building up a little bit of detail until our buildings look a little more nestled in the foliage we've got here. Now all I'm going to do is introduce a little bit of extra detail into this foreground. We've got some lovely foliage marks here that we made earlier with both the foliage brush and in the initial lovely thick layer of wet paint that we laid down in the initial wash. So I'm just putting a little bit of extra detail in with a liner brush, a few wibbly wobbly lines just to indicate some tree trunks, some sort of straggly bushes and clumps of flowers and plants, just to give a little bit of structure into this foliage-like colours that we've created here, just to give a little bit of extra helping hand to the eye to help create the illusion of this lovely tangle of forest and shrub. So now I'm beginning to fill in quite carefully the detail on this lovely hot air balloon. Save the best till last, they always say. I've had this masked out from the beginning. So I want to do this with a really bright sliver of colour down the left side. So I've mixed my burnt sienna with a little bit of the twin gold to give it that extra little boost. And so I'm putting that colour on primarily on the left side, and now in the photograph quite a lot of the balloon was in shadow, so I'm using the indigo again, really quite rich thick paint, and I'm introducing it on the right side, and I'm going to bring it across into the wet paint on the left and let it sort of run over. So we're left with the lovely sort of diffused look, the shadow sort of creeping round the circular shape of the balloon, and we still manage to capture that lovely bright pop of gold colour that we've got on the left side of the balloon. So while that's diffusing, I'm just going to use again my very fine brush to just tidy up the edges here and to pop in the detail on the little hanging basket below. And now for the finishing touch. I did debate whether or not to put birds in this photo, but I thought this beautiful sky was crying out for a little bit of extra detail. So while there are no birds in the reference photo, feel free to omit them if you like, but I just thought a lovely drift of birds winging their way skyward from this central tower would just finish this painting off beautifully. So again, I'm just using my fine detail brush dipped in indigo, varying the placement of the birds with their little V-shaped wings, some pointing up, some pointing down, just putting them in a little drift going upwards, keeping them smaller, closer to the ground, so farther away from the viewer, making them a little bit larger as they drift skyward towards us. So here we are with the finished painting. Got my lovely little drift of birds rising skyward. I must admit to being really pleased with how this painting came out. It didn't turn out looking hugely like my reference photo, but perhaps it's all the better for that, because it means that photo is still there waiting for me on my laptop, and I can have another go at it in a couple of weeks' time. So thank you very much everybody for watching today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please leave a like or subscribe if you are in the mood. Please also feel free to check out my Patreon page. And I look forward to seeing you all again in the next video.